Hi there, I'm Wendy McCallum, burnout and balance coach and wellness expert, and you're listening to Bite Size Balance, where everyday extraordinary women share their stories, expertise, and wisdom, all in the name of lifting each other up and creating a better life by design. Whether it's wellness, career, relationships, food, mindfulness, hormones, or parenting, we talk about all things women's balance. If your life looks great on paper, but it still feels like something's missing, you're in the right place. Welcome to Bite Size Balance. Hi, everybody. I am so excited that we have Dr. Sarah Baillie back with us today, the Meno Whisperer, who was my very first guest on episode 1. If you haven't listened to episode 1 yet, you're going to want to go back and listen to that after this episode. I have some really exciting news about Sarah. Sarah has agreed to become a regular guest on Bite Size Balance, which means that she's going to be here at least once a month, which I'm just so excited about. We received incredible response to the first podcast. I have never had so many emails and direct messages in the span of a week as I did that week, from all of you who listened to that podcast or watched the podcast and were just feeling like finally somebody was giving you the answers that you needed. We talked about menopause and perimenopause in that first episode and what's going on with women's hormones, but we really just touched on a lot of things. And what we wanted to do today was come back because it is now October, and October is World Menopause Awareness Month. And it seemed like a perfect time for us to get into some of these topics that we touched on in the first episode a little bit deeper. And I'm also hoping that today we're going to be able to respond to a lot of the questions that Sarah and I have received as in response to that first podcast. So welcome back, Sarah.
Hi, glad to be here.
I'm so glad you're here too. So it's World Menopause Awareness Month, as I said, and you're a specialist in perimenopause and menopause. I should say, Sarah, just by introduction, I'll introduce you again. You are a naturopathic doctor. You practice in Halifax, Nova Scotia at Halifax Naturopathic, and you really do have real interest and focus in women's hormones, and in particular, what's going on with women during perimenopause and menopause. So what I want to ask you about is...
Yeah, that's a large part of my practice.
Yeah, it's a huge part of Sarah's practice. And so that's why I call her the Meno Whisperer, because she just has such an incredible way of explaining these things in language that resonates with women. And she's not just talking about what's physically going on in our bodies. She's talking about what's physically going on in our bodies and how that parallels, ties in, conflicts with what we're dealing with in our real lives, our practical real lives as women, as career people, as daughters, as friends, all of that stuff. So as a specialist in perimenopause and menopause, Sarah, what's your experience been around the average woman's awareness? I'm putting that in air quotes, around what's going on in her body during perimenopause and menopause. I hear from my clients all the time in my coaching practice that they literally have no idea. Somebody said that to me yesterday. I literally have no idea what's going on. I have no information on perimenopause and menopause. Has that been your experience as well?
Well, a lot of people come to my office with symptoms of perimenopause where they have no idea that it's related to hormones. Some come now that people are starting to talk about it more. So some come with the question, is this perimenopause? They may have spoken with their mothers or remember their mothers going through a rough time and saying, I'm coming because I don't want that to happen to me. But I would say general awareness is pretty poor amongst women about what this transition looks like, how long it is, how early it can start, the fact that you could have symptoms up to, let's say an average of 5 to 7 years before you're actually in full menopause. Some women start 10 years before. If we really look back retrospectively, we can see that, sleep went off the rails at 38. And that possibly that was related to hormones as well. So I would say that the general awareness is pretty low, which is why when we do these podcasts or I write an article or I'm talking to women in my social circle or a little younger than I am, then the light bulbs start going off like, oh, maybe that's what's going on with me. So I do find in general that the awareness is not where we want it to be, that's for sure, which is part of why we're doing this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the big reasons we're doing this. And if you're listening to this podcast and you're thinking, oh, I'm too young for perimenopause or menopause, first of all, good for you. Yay. Sarah and I are not. But second of all, I would say this, keep listening.
because this is the type of information that is so helpful to have in advance. It's just so helpful to know what's coming instead of getting kind of blindsided by something and having no idea and being super confused as to what's going on. And it really is, Sarah and I have talked a lot about this outside of the recordings of these podcasts. It really is one of our main goals to help shed some light on all of this, demystify a lot of this stuff, and most importantly, get women celebrating this time of life instead of dreading it. So Sarah, we were chatting before we started recording this podcast about why we think it is that awareness is so low. And you had a good answer to that. Can you explain, kind of give us your thoughts as to why awareness is just lacking in this area?
I think that it's multifactorial. So I think for one, if you're relying on conventional medicine to tell you much about perimenopause, you're not going to get your answers there. There seems to be a big void of information between sort of the later years of fertility and menopause. There's not a lot of discussion, not a lot of awareness. The treatment options available for some of the symptoms of perimenopause the symptoms look a lot like other things, which I think we're going to talk about later, but so they're often just treated as the symptoms. So for example, anxiety and depression often treated with SSRIs, and insomnia treated with a sleeping pill. So that there's very little sort of awareness around looking deeper for the causation there, and that the possibility that those hormones might be slightly out of balance. One of the problems is in that system is that the measuring hormone levels during perimenopause doesn't tell you anything. That's part of the problem. So lack of measurement often means lack of diagnosis. So there's no way to say you are in perimenopause other than just a collection of symptoms. And so the conventional system doesn't really have a great framework for treating perimenopause. That's my experience and most of my patients' experiences.
Yeah.
I think there's also a number of other factors. We live in a patriarchal society. Let's just call it what it is. And women's health is not a priority. And also that influences the messages as women that we've been given around what menopause looks like. That menopause is kind of a withering away or a shriveling up of your sexuality or weakness. And unfortunately, what that's kind of seeped into many women's psyches around what this transition looks like. And therefore, the idea of accepting that you may be within the realm of the decades leading up to perimenopause can actually be kind of scary. So this idea that you might be losing something. The world that we live in approaches women's aging from a place of loss, not from a place of gain. And so it's sometimes women just do not want to hear that they may be perimenopausal, and that's completely fair because they don't know anything about it, and society tells them that this is kind of the end of their lives.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So when you're coming at it with all of those, and then the medical system not supporting you, when you're coming at it from that perspective, then of course there's a lot of blind spots around where you are in this sort of natural transition. We're more than happy to acknowledge that young girls at 10, 11, 12 are starting to be hormonal and starting to go through changes, and that puberty's coming, and isn't this exciting, and all these things are going to happen. But on the other end, there isn't that validation of that transition as something positive.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. There's so much resistance to it. It almost feels like, I certainly felt like to me before I started getting informed myself, and I hear like versions of this from the women that I work with in coaching, that it almost feels like a black hole. Like you're just going into it, and then there's a lot of uncertainty as to how long you're going to be in there, what it's going to be like, and whether, when you get spit out the other side, what that's going to look like. And I think that's one of the reasons I'm so excited to have you as a regular guest on this podcast, because both you and I feel really, really strongly that is not what it is, and that it's actually a time to finally start taking care of yourself and really redirecting that creative energy back at yourself. And I always say, like, it's almost like when you when you move through this transition, you're really at a time in your life when it's actually yours. Like, it's actually your time now. Because your kids, for the most part, kids are starting to get older, don't need us as much. Most of us have, had some great success in our careers already, or we have a career that we're ready to get back to. So Sarah and I are here to tell you that it's not a black hole. And if you feel like it's a black hole, we're hoping that through the course of this podcast, we can help to fill in the details of what's in there and change your perspective as to what it's going to be like to go through it all. So let's start, Sarah. We did talk about this in the first podcast, but I think this is important because most of the women that I work with around burnout and balance, when we're talking about, taking care of themselves and what might be going on with them, menopause or perimenopause is very often a factor in where they are and how they're feeling. And most of them, I find, don't even know what menopause is. So they're not even aware of the definition of menopause. They're not sure what perimenopause is versus menopause. So maybe you can run through that.
Okay, so menopause is clinically defined as 12 months without a menstrual cycle. It's the average age is about 51. However, some women go into menopause medically, so because of surgery or chemotherapy. Those could also be reasons to go into menopause. And then there are groups of women who are have premature ovarian insufficiency, which means that they start to go into menopause in their around 40 or earlier. But it's sort of a natural that in terms of natural menopause, it's like a depletion of the maturing eggs, basically. And so that's like 1 year is sort of definition for menopause, 1 year without a cycle. And the blood measurements, you can have blood work done at that point, which will tell you that you are in menopause. And that's when your FSH levels go up and your estrogen levels go down, and you're up at LH and progesterone also do the same thing. So LH goes up and progesterone goes down. So those are the things that you can measure. You can't really, you can, but you don't get good results from measuring those when you're in perimenopause, because perimenopause is the time prior to that cessation of the period. And so that's 5-7 years, sometimes a decade, let's say 7 years average. You may not have any idea that you're starting at 7 years beforehand. It may not show up for you, but it may be, it could be as small as just your PMS changes slightly, right? Or you stop sleeping before your periods. But that period leading up to it sort of increases in intensity as it gets closer to the time when you're actually going to have your last period. You don't know it's your last period until a year later. Yeah. Right. So it's diagnosed in hindsight.
Yeah. And we talked about this in the last podcast. During perimenopause, one of the difficulties with it in terms of you as a naturopath supporting women through perimenopause is that your hormones are very unpredictable. They're kind of all over the map, as opposed to once you enter into that full menopause, it becomes a more predictable kind of decline. Yeah. In estrogen, I guess, right?
It just it levels out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Everything levels out.
Okay. That's good news, right, Sarah? That it levels out?
Yes.
I mean, I'm just asking for a friend, but
Yeah. So, I mean, the tumultuous times of perimenopause can last, let's say, up to like a year to two after you've had your last period and you're defined in menopause. We could definitely see symptoms that are still unsteady in that year or two afterwards. But after that, it kind of levels out. And I usually tell people that the things like the mood swings and the anxiety and the general restlessness of perimenopause calms down. Yeah. After once those hormones just settle out.
Yeah. And I've said this to you before, and I'm not, I have no qualms about saying it here. I just turned 49, and I said to you the other day when we were meeting that I just have had this feeling a few months ago that something had shifted. And I'll tell you, I had a conversation with my husband about this because I was so damn refreshed when you didn't say, oh, no, it's impossible. That's impossible to know. which is what I feel like might have been the response had I been with some conventional medical practitioners around that. And so I loved the fact that you actually place some value in my own intuition and wisdom around that. I just have a very different feeling about things. It's not a bad feeling. It's just a kind of a certainty. It's actually kind of comforting to me, to be perfectly honest. And that's where I am right now. I am not in full menopause, but I do feel like I am at the beginning of that 12-month cycle, that 12-month period.
And then in contrast, I have 51 and I had 2 periods of 5 months with no cycle, and then stressful event came. And after that and I got a period during that stressful event. Yeah. And then it stopped again. Yeah. So it can really, I've had women go to 11 months and not have a period, and then get a period, and then have none, no more. Yeah. But we can't actually define it as menopause until we've had a year.
Exactly. And I think I've heard from so many people that it's quite common that it will literally happen in the 11th month. So I am prepared for that as well. But what I do feel certain of is that, you know, it might not take 12 months for me to get there. It might take longer than that, but that I have definitely moved into a different period, like a different time with my hormones. It does not feel as wild as it did for the last few years.
Yeah. And it feels, you've got that intuition, you can feel that. And that's part of that, developing that intuition and that knowing is part of the whole menopausal, perimenopausal transition, is, you know, really hearing and listening to your body and owning what's happening with it.
Yeah. And we might as well talk about that right now, because one of the things we talked about this before recording this podcast. We talked about this the last time we met to talk about types of things we want to talk about on this podcast. It's important, really important to both of us that we do the opposite of what often happens around menopause. We want you to, when you're listening to this podcast, we want you to feel hopeful. We want you to feel positive about this transition. We want you to get excited about what are the possibilities that are going to open up to you as you go through all of this. And one of the things that Sarah talked about in episode 1 that I just want to talk about again, Sarah, I didn't prepare you for this, I'm sorry, but I do want to talk about it again, because I think it was one of the most resonant pieces of that first podcast, was when we talked about the fact that estrogen is our primary nurturing hormone. And as when we go through puberty, it rises and it continues to be elevated during the course of the years when we biologically are kind of primed to have our kids and be raising children. But as we move into perimenopause, it starts to fluctuate. And obviously in menopause itself, that it has declined and it sort of flattens out, as you just said. And what you were talking about the last time was how that, what the impact of that decline in our prime nurturing hormone is on how we behave and feel as women. And I would love it if you would just explain that quickly again for the people who didn't listen to the first podcast.
Okay. So if you think of the hormones of fertility, which whether or not you choose to have children or can have children or not, they're designed for reproduction of the species, right? From a pure biological standpoint. And those hormones that are so full during those years, creating a regular menstrual cycle, are also the hormones of nurturing. They're basically so that you don't eat your babies, right? If we're going to have them, then we're going to keep the species going. Then we also need to protect them and look after them. And so those hormones actually keep you able to nurture either children or careers or partners or parents or girlfriends or whatever for a number of years, for all, up until sort of mid 40s. So those hormones are operating in you in order to, and they help you push through. They help you just go get everything done, right? And a lot of that creative energy is, well, most of it is external at that time. I don't know many women in their 30s with busy careers and busy families who are spending a whole lot of time nurturing themselves, right? So it's more about external nurturing. And then in mid 40s, when the hormones are really shifting, also what's happening is that the estrogen levels are fluctuating. And in that time, you can feel that resistance to looking after people, things, organizations, whatever it is that you've been putting your energy into, there can be a feeling of resistance to doing that. And that feeling of resistance can be very uncomfortable because not only have you created an identity around it for all those years, but also because the people out there in the world who are the beneficiaries of your nurturing, if you will, also don't know that you are feeling this way. And so they continue to ask of you the same level of care. And internally, quite often, women are feeling resentful about that and they don't actually want to give it and they're feeling burnt out. And that's completely normal. This is what I want to stress, is that shift to looking inward and actually that what happens is that the energy kind of turns inward and it becomes about creating yourself instead of creating things outside and nurturing things outside or beings outside. And so it can create a lot of conflict in the mid 40s around where you're going to put your energy, because a big part of you, now that the estrogen levels are changing, has a big part of you is pulling towards looking after yourself and feeling what we define in society as selfish, right? So it's actually self-care, but the feelings that you often come with it are a feeling of selfishness, like, I don't really want to go to that recital.
Right.
I don't really want to go to the gymnastics performance, but I feel bad about it because I'm her mother, or but the feeling about it is more about the hormonal, the hormones aren't there to kind of keep pushing you towards that nurturing.
Yeah. I love that. And I think it's so we can all relate to that. If we get honest about how a lot of us are feeling anyway as we go into our 40s, that's definitely something that resonated with me when you first explained that to me. I also see that expressed in my practice this way. I was listening to you, I was thinking about how often I hear people say, like, I just had to get through it. Like every day in my 30s, I was just thinking to myself, I just have to get through this day. And it was, we deemed it a successful day if we made it. If we got through it, if we got all the stuff done, if we took care of everybody. As I used to jokingly say to my mom at the end of the day when she'd call me, she'd say, how was your day? And I'd say, my kids are still alive. So it was a good day.
You didn't eat your babies.
I didn't eat my babies. Good for me. And then
let them get eaten.
Exactly. And then, so you get through that period and it's usually your 30s, the beginning of your 40s, where you just feel like you're go, 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 go. And the goal is really just to get through it. And then women say to me in their, early, mid, late 40s, when they come in to work with me, largely around burnout, which is what I work with. And there's such a connection there. You and I are going to do a whole episode on burnout down the road. So that is coming. But they often say to me, I'm thinking about this idea of just getting through the day. And I am very resentful about the fact that my goal is to get through the day. I don't want to get through the days anymore. I don't want to wish my days away. I want my days themselves to have a quality to them that is something that I can celebrate. And that is where I, as a balance and burnout coach, what I do is I start working on exactly what you're talking about, this idea of like true self-care, what that really looks like, and how to actually create a day that feels resonant to you and feels amazing to you. And so I think this ties in really nicely with, the timing oftentimes of this kind of midlife burnout that women find themselves in.
Yeah. I think the midlife burnout that you talk about is revealed often because the hormones drop, right?
Yeah,
so
that might be right.
It's like the veil comes down and it's all of a sudden it's just like, what am I doing? I cannot expend this kind of energy anymore, and nor do I actually need to, and so it's about prioritizing the things that require, obviously there's lots of things that will still require our attention, but the thing, aging parents and maybe still teenagers at home and careers and things like that, but how can we structure our lives around looking after ourselves and building energy into the next phase of our lives, rather than, because many women are showing up at this time of life depleted, and that's because those hormones just kept you going, right? And so then what? Then you kind of have to look at, okay, now how do we build energy into this system so that we can transition into menopause healthily?
Yeah, exactly. There's that physical rebuilding. And then what I see, and you see that I think a lot on your side of this issue, working with women, and the same women who I work with, I see it more on the side of feeling like there's something missing. So they've been, all of their time has been consumed in taking care of everybody else, taking care of their career, taking care of everyone, except themselves, largely over the course of their 30s and early 40s. And now they find themselves at a place where they're saying, like, I got everything on paper. It's all here. I got the job, the career, I got the partner, I got maybe the family, the dog, the whatever it is. I feel like I have all of these things, but it still feels like something's missing. And it feels wrong for me to feel like something is missing, because I should be happy. I should be satisfied. And I think it's really interesting that, when we put this in under kind of the what's the word, when we kind of connect it and overlay the hormonal changes that are happening on that, it's really interesting to see how those two things might connect to each other.
Yeah, it's all about like it's about kind of changing expectations too, so that when you say something's missing, that was fulfilled during those. It's not a bad thing. It's that feeling of fullness at the time prior to perimenopause was being satisfied by something else.
Right.
And now that the hormones have come and changed and are, actively changing, there becomes an awareness as this phase starts to come to a close. The awareness is that I now have to find that missing piece. It's just a new missing piece.
It's an
right?
opportunity,
so,
really,
yeah,
right?
it's that's the word.
Yeah,
It's
an opportunity.
It's just like, okay, now we expose that there's this piece now that needs to be filled up, that it was okay 10 years ago to have it this way, and now it's not, and so I need to work on. And that's where this energy turns inward and becomes about looking after yourself, which is really what, moving through the transition into menopause is about. It's really about reclaiming yourself.
Right. And I said this last time, and I'll say it again. I feel like you feel this way too. This podcast is brought to you by menopause. So the fact that I got to this place, like 10 years ago, I never would have thought of doing this, but this is 100%. And I think the same for you, right? This is me turning that creative energy inward. This is me saying, okay, I still haven't done all the things I want to do, but now I have this opportunity. It feels like, both from an emotional perspective, because I no longer feel like I need to be taking care, or I want to be taking care of everybody else all the time. And because I don't want to just get through my days anymore. I want to make these days amazing, and I want to do the things that I deserve to be able to do. And one of them is to be able to do a podcast like this and have amazing guests on like you, and have conversations about things that might actually help other women out there. So thank you, menopause. We should have the new hashtag is #brought to you by menopause.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about some of the symptoms of menopause, and we talked about those in the first podcast, and you've mentioned a few of them today, but maybe you can just talk about, the maybe top 3 or 4 like most common things that you see. I know there are so many, and it's a really broad spectrum. I can't talk about all of them today, but just some of the more common things that you see, and then maybe we'll talk about a couple that are often unexpected that people don't attribute to menopause, but that you do see.
Okay, well, I mean, the first one everybody thinks about is hot flashes. So hot
flashes. What's going on there, Sarah?
Sweats.
Can you tell people what is going on with a hot flash? Because that is my, as you know, that is my number one symptom that is currently like driving me bananas, is the hot flashes, which are happening for me at night, which is really just, so we call it a night sweat, but it is a hot flash that happens at night, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how much do we actually know about hot flashes? Not enough. This is another area that's understudied, because it's not a life and death situation. It's women's health.
Says who?
Well,
Says who? Exactly. I'm losing my marbles. I think my husband and my kids would say it's a life or death situation.
Yeah, totally. At 3 a.m., it's a life and death situation. Yeah. So hot flashes, what's believed about hot flashes, we know that, you know, some of the mechanisms involved is basically vasodilation. So your blood vessels open up and trying to release heat from the body. We talked in the last podcast about this narrow zone of thermoregulation. So in a non-menopausal woman, the zone might be this big. So, you know, you can, it's a certain number of degrees. I can't remember if it's like 0.4 or 1.4. Anyways, this zone where your body can handle changes in temperature without reacting, without freaking out. And so that allows you to be comfortable when you drink a hot cup of coffee, or decaf, of course. You drink a hot cup of any liquid, or you get a little overheated in your bed, or, you know, those sorts of things. Your body can, it just adjusts itself, and it has this zone of tolerance to that. But in menopause, the zone like becomes this
it
wide.
shrinks. You're gesturing like, with your hands. So for you're listening on the podcast, Sarah's making shrinks, she's shrinking that zone.
Oh yeah, sorry, I forgot we were also just audio.
That's okay.
So it's quite wide at the beginning. There's a lot of tolerance, and then your tolerance shrinks significantly. And so every minute change in your body in terms of temperature can create this like bing, 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 bing reactivity. Which, you know, I think is also true for all the other symptoms of perimenopause and menopause. There's just a heightened degree of reactivity. However, what happens then is that the body wants to get rid of that extra heat, and so it opens it up, and you sweat and get hot, and you discharge heat. It's like a fever almost, you know, like your body's trying to discharge heat, and it's, you know, there's a lot of triggers for that. So things like caffeine, so stimulants, the central nervous system is involved in this. And so when you have any stimulation of the central nervous system, whether it be with caffeine or it be alcohol or sugar or emotions, any emotion really could trigger.
And stress, right?
Stress, yeah. Yeah, any stressors. You know, I know that if I'm doing okay on my side of the bed, my husband and I now have separate pods. So he sleeps under one set of duvets and I sleep under another.
Oh, me too. Oh,
so that I can like adjust mine without annoying him in the middle of the night. But if he puts his hand on my back, you know, that lovely gesture of tenderness, I'm like, get that off me, because that basically just makes my body go into 5 alarm mode. You know, doesn't even matter how stable I've got my particular system. If his warm hand ends up on my back in the middle of the night, it's full on hot flash.
Yeah.
And so that's the kind of thermoregulatory sensitivity. It's just that is there, right? So just the change with adding his heat to my back changes things.
Right.
So
yeah. Okay. That's happening during the day too for women who have what we would typically call a hot flash. It's exactly the same thing. It's just happening during the daytime. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's lots of different triggers. I mean, all the body's metabolic processes at night, you know, where we're storing sugar and breaking stuff down, and all of that generates heat. And so it can be related to that. It can be related to a poor sleep. It can be related to all sorts of things. And we don't have a full definition of what exactly is happening during a hot flash. The latest research suggests that there's a relationship also to serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter, and cortisol, and I can't remember the other one. Anyway, so that the brain chemistry is also affecting it, because some women do better on SSRIs or antidepressants for their like very severe hot flashes.
Right.
And so, you know, there's a relationship there as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess, you know, that's just one symptom. We're going to talk about a couple other ones, but as I talk more and more with you about this, I keep coming back to this place of like feeling like the best thing I could do for myself is to start taking care of myself, like taking that, you know, this naturally, it almost feels to me like one of the things that like, this is actually really, you know, purposeful, this whole, like whatever created us, this makes total sense to me, that as estrogen goes down and I start not wanting to take care of other people, and in fact start wanting to take care of myself, that is exactly what I physiologically need to be doing, because taking care of yourself is, you know, in my definition of self-care and your definition of self-care, I think are very similar. It's really about like what you truly need more of to stay healthy, balanced, well, and mentally well. And you know, for me, a lot of those activities and a lot of the activities that I coach around for women feeling similarly, you know, those activities are things that help to bring your cortisol down, ground you, relax you, force you to kind of slow down, and you know, kind of nourish your body and give it what it needs, more of what it needs and less of what it doesn't need, less of the stimulants, and more of the things that are actually going to help you to stay calm and balanced and kind of, I guess, naturally maintain some homeostasis in these areas. Am I off base there? Or am I wildly off? Or?
It's a brilliant system. It's like a coming home, right? It's just like, okay, now you're being forced to be backing your body in a very significant way, because it's telling you that we actually can't live on 3 cups of coffee every morning anymore. That's just not going to work. I used to be able to drink coffee before bed when I was 18, then go straight to bed. No problem sleeping. Now, if I drink coffee before bed, I wouldn't sleep for a week. So, yeah, it's like the body's actually saying, time for some real awareness around you, whatever that looks like. And so taking note of how things affect you. So what are your particular triggers for a hot flash? It's really instrumental in trying to figure out how it is that you're going to calm them down.
And that is a gift. The fact that we get this warning, like this biological warning, this physiological warning that says like, you have to start taking care of yourself. Now is the time to do that. I think that is a gift. And I think that, you know, it doesn't always, as we talked about in the first podcast, it doesn't always time nicely with where we are in our lives. It's often a challenge. And I mean, that's one of the reasons why, you know, I am busy in my practice helping women with this, because if it was easy, we would all be, you know, we would all do it. But it is a challenge, but it is absolutely possible to do it. And I do believe that this is one of the gifts of perimenopause and menopause, is that it actually forces women to kind of slow down and say, oh, wait a second, this thing that I thought was kind of optional and selfish for 30, or not for 30 years, but for 10 years or 15 years, this thing that I thought was like asking too much, taking too much, it's now necessary for my very basic physical health and emotional and mental health. Yeah. Okay. So we just talked about hot flashes. How about a couple more of the kind of more common symptoms?
So hard. Hard to say most common. Hot flashes, so the insomnia that comes from heat at night, and many women, because they perceive that a night sweat is diagnostic for menopause, like in order to say it's hormonal, I have to actually be sweating at night. That's not the case, because it's sort of referred to as a night sweat. Not everybody sweats. Not everybody has to change their pajamas. You know, that's the gold standard of the night sweat. It's like if you have to get up and change your pajamas, you really have night sweats. But it's you know, if you're just putting your feet out in the middle of the night, or just one foot out because all of a sudden you've gotten hot and you need to cool down, I consider that a hormonal vasodilatory symptom. So like,
that's actually a really great point, Sarah, because one of the things I think I was saying to you, I think I said on the first podcast, Sarah's been helping me try to, you know, come up with some way to manage my night sweats better because they've been so disruptive. And I've been taking a little, I call it the witch's potion. Not that you're a witch, Sarah, but I do consider you to be coming into your own wisdom as a crone. Anyway, Sarah's got me on this stuff, and it does help. It's helped a lot. And in fact, for a month, it really did the trick in terms of my sleep was great for about 3 or 4 weeks after I started taking it. But then, as Sarah has explained, my hormones probably went into some other state of flux because I'm not quite into menopause yet. So I'm still all over the map, and it just wasn't working as well anymore. I had to up the dosage. And one of the things that I noticed is that with the increased dosage, I will have less intense sweats. So I'll still wake up, but it won't be the same full sweat. And then sometimes I will not have any actual sweating, but I will wake up and it will feel exactly like I'm about to have a night sweat. And so I think that that's just more evidence as to what you're talking about, which is like, this is really just that waking that happens might just be that you're at this place where it's not triggering a full sweat yet. It's just enough to wake you up. Which, just FYI, sucks too. Like that also sucks. I do not enjoy that, because then I'm lying there waiting, like I'm waiting for it. And then I'm wide awake, of course, after that. So,
but imagine if you didn't have any information about that. And that was, you know, when I start to really dissect what's going on with people's sleep, I really have to ask those very specific questions. Like, are there times in the night where you literally wake up and they say, no, I'm not hot. And I say, well, are you putting your, you know, are you getting up to pee? Are you putting your foot out of the bed? Are you, oh yeah, I'm doing that. I'm like, no. So that's a thing, right? But because they're not having a full night sweat, they might not think that it's a full menopausal event, right?
Right.
And so it's just that little bit. The other thing is that you can wake up in menopause with nothing but sort of a cortisol effect. So you could wake up with heart palpitations and a feeling of like intense alertness and not actually have any heat or sweat.
And so what would cause that, Sarah? Like if you weren't, so if it's the middle of the night and cortisol, you know, obviously, well, maybe not obviously, but you and I know that cortisol is produced from a variety of different causes in our body. But what would be the likely trigger for your cortisol rising like that enough to wake you up in the middle of the night if you're sleeping? Would that be related to those stimulants and that smaller window for that, or is it something else?
Oh, that's a large question.
Okay.
So, I mean, it can be, you know, let's just say it can be still the hormones. It's just not manifesting in you or in that person as a night sweat or as a, you know, it's still a hormonal reaction. So it's still a fluctuation of the hormones.
Right.
And it can, so also from a cortisol perspective, like if you're living in high stress all day long and then you are able to get to sleep, let's just say hypothetically you're able to get to sleep, your melatonin is able to override that cortisol and like put you into a sleep. That's your natural melatonin. Then at some point that melatonin is starting to wear off and then the cortisol kicks back in and goes, why are you asleep? You're being chased by a saber-toothed tiger, which is what it knows from your day, right? That's what it knows from the coffee and the being on all day and being stressed. Why, if you're running away from a predator, are you suddenly able to like lay down and go to sleep? The body doesn't understand that, right? If it's in a high stress mode. So that can be that kind of kicking in of that actual stress. And it's not necessarily that, the, you know, you were dreaming about something that was stressful from work, or it was something stressful from work in particular. It's actually just your body remembering that it's being chased by a predator.
Right. That makes sense. And so that would be another reason why, because I have been spending a lot of time researching this or trying to, and obviously, as you have said, there's not a lot of stuff out there that's helpful around these topics. And of course, I'm just relying on Google and like WebMD, which I know is not what I should be doing. And that's why you're here, because you're the expert. But one of the things that has come up is something that has been researched, and there does seem to be some connection, is the connection between a better management of some of these symptoms that we're talking about and regular meditation. And that of course appeals to me because that is something that is low hanging fruit for most women. It's within our grasp and power. There are no negative side effects, only positive benefits to meditation. And, you know, something that's pretty easy to learn, and you could really do it in like 10 minutes a day. And so I was really interested to see that. And I guess the connection is that meditation as an activity helps to reduce cortisol, which we know it helps to calm you down, bring you down, reduce blood pressure and all of that stuff. So I guess a regular practice of meditation is something from a preventative perspective that might help with this whole saber-toothed tiger chasing thing, and have your body feel like it can trust a little more that that's not going to happen.
Yeah. Anytime you can get your body into the opposite of fight or flight, the rest and digest state, which we're going to do a whole thing on that anyways. But anytime you can get your body into that state, then it's favoring rest and repair and reproduction. And so by favoring reproduction, it's favoring hormone balance, right?
Right.
It favors all of those long-term survival things for not only you, but also your species. So it's, anytime you drop your cortisol level, anytime you drop your adrenaline level, every time you get into a parasympathetic state, which is the opposite of fight or flight, you're reassuring your body that it's safe, right?
Okay,
You're
I just
telling your
had a
body
light
that
bulb.
it's safe.
Yeah, I just had a light bulb thing there. Light bulb moment. And a menopausal moment, because I couldn't remember the word for moment. No, I just had a bit of a
We
light
need to
bulb
come up
there.
with a word for that.
I know.
What's the menopausal light bulb moment? It's got to be something different.
And it would have nothing to do with light bulbs or moments.
Right.
It would be some completely like kitchen sink or something. Okay, so the moment that I had there, the little flash that I had is that I talk to women all the time about how when you're in fight or flight, your body basically, and we're doing a whole podcast on this, guys, but what happens when you're in that fight or flight stress response is that your body prioritizes the systems that it perceives to be essential to deal with the saber-toothed tiger, with whatever the stressor is. And some of those things include like, sharpening your eyesight and raising your heart rate and your blood pressure and contracting your muscles and the things that you would need to literally fight a threatening thing. But when it does that, it also, it's diverting energy away. It basically shuts down the systems that it perceives to be non-essential during that time. And I always talk about digestion because, of course, I have this, background and started off around food and nutrition in my coaching practice and now do far more than that, but I still bring food in all the time. And I always talk about how digestion gets compromised during fight or flight, which is why when you find yourself in a terrifying situation, you might just pee your pants. It's because everything just gets shut down and your digestion, oftentimes people have symptoms of digestive, compromised digestion when they are in chronic stress. Like they have, there's a variety of those things that happen. Butterflies before you do public speaking or feeling nauseous or, all of that stuff. But I never connected reproduction as a system in that. So I just had a real light bulb moment that makes total sense. When you're in that fight or flight state, one of the systems that is compromised because your body perceives it to be not essential, you don't need to be reproducing, you just need to stay alive in the moment, right? So that system is compromised. And when we're talking about hormonal balance during perimenopause and menopause, that system being compromised or turned off is just exacerbating all of the symptoms that you're having as opposed to supporting a balancing of those. That's so fascinating to me. I can't wait to do our stress podcast now. That's so fascinating. A bit of an aside. How about a couple of symptoms that often get attributed to something else? So, we talked about this a little bit in the first podcast, but just a couple of the common, some of the common things that can be connected to this hormonal period of transition and change that are often attributed to something completely different or can be attributed to something different.
So anxiety and depression are two. It's always a tough conversation around anxiety and depression because there are people who definitely struggle with anxiety and depression that have nothing to do with their, reproductive hormone balance. And so we don't want to negate that.
Of course.
However, women who have sort of new onset or new aggravation of anxiety, particularly around perimenopause, that it's not that it's mistaken for something else. It's just that it's just often treated as just that, right? So it's it's often just medicated, and I see a lot of that in my office. I mean, it's all, I would say 70% of the women who come into my office in perimenopause are medicated for sleep and anxiety.
I would say 70% of the women that I coach are medicated for sleep and anxiety. It's maybe it's not 70, but it's a very high percentage.
Yeah. And so there's a huge percentage of those women that if we had balanced their hormones at the onset of these symptoms may not have had to go down that road. The other thing that is often misattributed is weight. So the menopausal weight gain will often be what's going on with my thyroid. And yes, absolutely, thyroids can kick out around in perimenopause and menopause and start to show signs of stress. But a lot of times thyroid tests come back completely normal, and it's actually just the whole sort of changes in body composition and and aging and lifestyle factors that have to do with menopausal weight gain. So that is often misattributed to uh, thyroid, or thyroid is often misattributed to perimenopause. You know, those kinds of,
Right.
they're intertwined and get confused sometimes. I'm trying to think of other things that might be menopausal, but I think mostly mental health and sleep. Like those are the two biggest that show up as having been missed, if you will,
Right.
as actually hormonal.
Right. Yeah. So if someone's listening to this podcast and they're thinking, oh, maybe that's me.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we are not suggesting that you go off any medication or change anything that has been
No.
advised by a medical practitioner ever.
No.
And we are not providing health advice here. We're just trying to provide more information and awareness around this topic. But I think we talked about this a little bit in the last podcast. You know, there are ways to support your body through this transition that are complementary. There are different ways that we can approach this. And so if you're listening to this podcast and you're thinking, oh, I think maybe some of this stuff is happening, you know, all we're trying to say is that there are a variety of different approaches out there that can be very complementary. And we are not in any way suggesting the medical approach is not a valid part of that. But, you know, Sarah is here as a naturopath, and I am here as a person who supports women through, you know, the lifestyle changes that can be really supportive and helpful around this time in your life.
Yeah, I never suggest women go off their medication.
Mm-hmm.
That's not my goal. My goal is to support systems that may have not been supported, so as to facilitate creating a strong foundation, whereby if they would like to have that conversation with their physician around reducing medication or trying less, or, you know, trying to get off of them, then that's a possibility. But, you know, I'm certainly not coming at it from the perspective of you have to be off all medication. Generally, women were put on these medications for valid reasons, because the stress of the anxiety, depression, insomnia was interrupting their lives enough that they felt that they needed to be medicated. What I'm saying is that underneath that, there also may be a hormone imbalance, and that is going to still be operating underneath all those medications. Right.
And those are that there are ways to support hormonal balance that may just complement whatever the current treatment is that's being undertaken for it. So, and some of those things are things that you do through a naturopathic approach, and some of them are things that I do. And then there are all kinds of other people out there who do a variety of other things that are supportive. I think the biggest thing that's come out of this podcast episode today for me is that this is, you know, that there's kind of like, it all comes back down to this idea of like, you got to slow down and you got to get a bit mindful, and you really have to dig into what you are actually doing to take care of yourself and what you're not doing. And I say this all the time in the process of coaching, getting aware about things like that is often really uncomfortable. It often doesn't feel great when we realize, oh, I've legit not taken care of myself for 15 years. I have been doing nothing to support, you know, some of these pillars of health, or maybe all of them, you know, for the last 15, 20 years, as I've been directing all of my energy outward. But it's seeming to me, as I talk more and more to you about this, that one of the things that is really important in Menopause Awareness Month is to get aware as to what is going on with you, and to actually increase, you know, try to increase your mindfulness and awareness around what you are doing to support your body as it goes through this kind of amazing part of life. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we need to change our narrative around it. It needs to be about embracing the fact that this thing is happening. You know, this transition is going to happen in your life, and you have an opportunity to really, I was going to use the word exploit, but use it as an opportunity. Like, take this and take advantage of it. Own it. You know, this is a big change in your life. This is not a small thing. Puberty was a big thing in your life, and this is the like adult equivalent of puberty, really. And so it can be an exciting time. It can open new ventures for you, whether it be physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, all of these things, but all these aspects of your life can benefit from it. And you have an opportunity right now. While the roller coaster to get there can sometimes be challenging, and so wanting to pull back from that can feel natural, because it's, as you say, it's not easy. It's not easy to go through these times where you have to reevaluate your life, and you have to look at, or perhaps evaluate it for the first time, and you actually have to look at what you are doing to support yourself, and that can be challenging. And I think perimenopause, I think this, like that narrow window of reactivity that I talked about, I actually think that's kind of helps us do that, because it puts us in a state where we can't actually numb it out so much, that it's just there and it's going to be there, and you're going to have to listen.
Yeah,
and if you
that's
don't
so
listen,
great.
you're going to be like really irritable and angry all the time.
Yeah, it's like a major warning.
Off.
Yeah, like a natural warning system. Like,
yeah.
Houston, we have a problem. It's time to slow down. It's time,
Yeah.
And awareness is really uncomfortable a lot of the time, because a lot of the time it's admitting that we haven't done something that maybe it would have been a good idea if we'd done more of. But the truth is that no positive change is possible without awareness. It's the first step in making any positive change. So I always recommend and say to my clients, like, celebrate it. Yeah, it's uncomfortable and it kind of sucks to realize that, you dropped the ball here, which is not what I'm saying around this, by the way, but sometimes that's the case when you get aware, depending on what you're getting aware around. But just that awareness, it is uncomfortable. It means that you have to do something. It's oftentimes feels hard to do the thing that you have to do, but celebrate that awareness, because it's the beginning of something great. And I think that that's the perfect place to end this podcast. Sarah and I are going to continue this conversation. We were pretty sure it was going to take us 2 episodes to cover this topic. So we're going to end this one for today. And while you won't hear the next one for another week, we are going to keep chatting and record the second part of this podcast focused on World Menopause Awareness Month. Thank you so much, Sarah, for being here. I look forward to continuing to chat with you about this.
Okay, see you next week.
You've been listening to Bite Size Balance with your host, Wendy McCallum. As a burnout and balance coach, I help busy high achievers like you create a more balanced, joyful life. To be sure you don't miss any upcoming bite-sized conversations, subscribe now to this podcast. For more balance and wellness tips, or to connect with me, visit my website at wendymccallum.com. That's WENDYMCCALLUM.com.